I love reading Malazan, Book of the Fallen, but I think that what I enjoy more than reading the series itself is just daydreaming about the world and about the characters and just the rampant speculation that tumbles through my mind. And one of the things I think about the most is Kalam Mekar and how I think he is just built different. A lot of people have talked about how he's kind of like a Mary Sue in some situations in the series, and I just completely disagree. I think that there is a foundation that his character is built on, and I really want to talk about it today. I mean, Kalam is the greatest assassin ever. He's faced demons, demigods, and at one point, while wounded and near death, he killed a shit ton of fellow assassins. And yeah, some people will say that makes him a bit of a Mary Sue, but I don't think so. Before we go any further, I want to say that all of this is speculation on my part. I'm using some examples from the book, but I'm going to avoid specific events because I don't want this to spoil anyone that's reading the series. I want anyone that has read the first book or all 10 to be able to watch this and just have a discussion with me about Kalam. Since this is a booktube channel, I'm also going to make some book recommendations as I'm going through here, kind of a cite my sources type thing. I highly recommend any of the books that come up during this video. Let's talk about what makes him so much more effective than his peers in the assassin trade, especially in how it relates to other members of the Claw, which is Lessine's elite guild of assassins. It comes down to 3 things listed in order of importance: mindset, training, and physicality. Let me explain why those are in that order. I've spent a lot of time reading books on personal defense, fighting mindset, stuff like that. And the reason they're in that order is because if you do not have the proper mindset, it doesn't matter how much training you have or how well built you are not going to win a fight. You can have a perfect mindset and great training, and it doesn't matter if you're not the strongest. But the thing that makes Kalam different is he has all 3 in spades. Another thing I didn't mention, which is probably obvious, is I didn't mention any gear. Doesn't matter if you have magic blades, doesn't matter if you have like a magic amulet. If you don't have the mindset, the training, or the physicality, the gear doesn't matter. Let's start with mindset. Some people just have a mental durability that you don't find in the general populace. In the self-defense books and war memoirs I've read over my whole life, they always talk about the guys who never gave up. They have a mental fortitude that allows them to push themselves beyond what should have been their physical limits. This cat is biting me right now, and it's incredibly distracting, but look at him. He is the cutest baby in the world. Back to what I was saying. In About Face by David Hackworth, he talks about guys like this in every war he fought in. He got into World War II right at the end of the war. He helped occupy Europe, and he learned from like the old guard, some of the OG soldiers that were still around from before the war started. He also fought in Korea twice. He was there for the shitstorm at the beginning, and he was there when not much was happening and we weren't trying to win anymore. And then he went on to be one of the greatest military officers in the Vietnam War. Like I said, he talks about people with mindsets like this, and considering he's one of the most decorated war veterans in the history of the United States, I'm going to believe him when he says that some people have a mental mindset that is just different. You see it throughout the books in Kalam's mindset, the hypervigilance, the being aware of his surroundings and always scanning for threats. There's a book called Principles of Personal Defense by Jeff Cooper, and he has a color grid that describes different conditions your mind is in when you're trying to protect yourself. And white is you're safe at home or you're somewhere where you know there won't be a threat. And most people kind of live in condition white. They're not really aware of the dangers around them. And yellow is being on the lookout for threats, like scanning your surroundings, looking for anything that may lead to harm. And then you've got orange, which is you know the threat, you found the threat, and you're aware that it could harm you. Red is when it's time to pop off and end the threat. And this requires the next step, which is training and mastery of martial skills. Especially in a world like Malazan where everyone's using blades. There's a common saying in like modern personal defense circles, and it talks about knife fighting. And it's the guy that wins the knife fight gets to die on the way to the hospital instead of dying at the scene. Blades are no joke. And so, especially when it comes to assassins and the level of vigilance required to not just die, I don't think I could handle that kind of mental strain. Training. This is where things are going to get a little crazy when it comes to speculation on my part. So just bear with me. Let's start with what we know. So Kalam was already trained as an assassin in the Seven Cities at the time that the Malazan Empire was invading. And the fact that he managed to stay alive is a pretty big deal. And then we've got the fact that he was then taken in as a member of the Claw at a much older age than most apprentices are taken in. And this was at a time when Lacine was focused on quality of assassin and quality of character because she was trying to consolidate power. Later on, she focused more on loyalty, which may explain some of the reasons why Kalam is so good in fights against newer members of the Claw. Also, Kalam left the Claw, which you see in Gardens of the Moon, and he's a soldier. And I think him becoming a soldier helped round out his fighting capabilities in ways most assassins never attain. At the time we see him in the books, he's trained as a Seven Cities assassin, a Claw assassin, and a conventional soldier. In Range, Why Generalists Triumph in a Specialized World by David Epstein, which is a fantastic book, we discover that specialization leads to worse outcomes in most endeavors that involve the body and the mind. The two major exceptions being chess and gymnastics, because chess is about memorization of patterns, so the earlier you start, the better you're going to be at it. And gymnastics, your career's over at 17, so starting late wouldn't really do anything for you. Early specialization leads to a calcification in a person's mind when it comes to the skills they use. A broad range of abilities starting at a young age can help improve the quality of later abilities by training your brain early to adapt to new things. I'm a big fan of baseball, and you see it a lot with players who are just drafted young. They're on fire in the minor leagues, and then they burn up or wash out before they can make it to the majors. A lot of those kids have been playing baseball since they were 5 years old, and they never played any other sports. And so what that ends up doing is it ends up creating these neural pathways that are ingrained so deep that when the difficulty level of the sport starts going up, they get left behind because they can't adapt the same way someone who can that has a wider range of skills. In Kalam's case, he has a broad range of experiences in combat, while most assassins are taken in at an early age for training and indoctrination. This sets them at a disadvantage when they come upon a guy with their same skill sets and some shaved knuckles in the form of a wider array of training. So you put Kalam against just about any other assassin, he's going to have skills in his bag that they've never seen or never dealt with directly. So that automatically gives him a huge advantage. Look at athletes like Roger Federer, Bo Jackson, and Tom Brady. They all specialized later in life and went on to be some of the best in the world. When it comes to Bo Jackson, he ended up specializing in two things, in baseball and football. And, Kalam specialized in assassinations and fighting like a soldier. I have a favorite quote from Robert Heinlein that sums this up pretty well. Specialization is for insects. That's just a short summary of the quote. In arrogant Heinlein fashion, the first part of it was him trying to flex that he was better than everyone else, so I left it out. Basically, what he's trying to say is over-specializing is stupid. Everyone should kind of develop a wide array of skills. Having a huge foundation of skills will make you better at the things you focus on later. So those are the things I've covered that you can get directly from the books. Now I want to talk about my crackpot speculation about what makes him different as it applies to training assassins. Let's get a little dark and talk about the inhumanity of the Malazan Empire and how I would have trained assassins if I were in Lacine's place. This is my guess on types of training used to make claw assassins. In Sentinel by Pat McNamara, he discusses the importance of training like you fight. And an assassin is always going to be outnumbered, and there's a good chance they will be injured and maybe dying if things go south. And we know that members of the Claw are capable of stopping themselves from bleeding to death by focusing on that part of the body and basically restricting blood flow with like a contraction of muscles or whatever they're doing. We don't really know. And my question is, how do they learn how to do that? How do they get to that point? And what I think is with a cadre of medics and Denul healers, I would push my trainees to the limit in very malicious ways. Something like, oh, you think you can fight well? Let's see you defend yourself after I slice open your guts. Make sure you hold them in and stop the bleeding while you're fighting everyone. Then I would heal them and make them do it again. Actual fights to near death will help a trainee better do that when it really matters. It would be a waste of talent to spend all this time training them and being like, well, this is what you'll have to do when you get in a fight and you're bleeding to death. I think it works way better if in their training, you mess them up so bad they can barely function and you force them to fight anyways. This is also where mindset comes into play with training. You have to have a mental toughness to be able to do stuff like this and not suffer severe amounts of PTSD. Now, Kalam's upbringing was probably awful in the Seven Cities, but it created a mental toughness that allowed him to survive and thrive in what I assume would be the most grueling training a person can experience. We see time and time again Kalam do things while dying that most of us couldn't do in peak physical condition. How else do you get abilities like that without training in the way I'm talking about? Let's move on to the least important but still relevant quality of physicality. In the books, Kalam is described as being built like a bear but graceful. At one point, Kalam says that Quickben has called him the densest person he has ever met. People just like bounce off him when he's walking through a crowd. So he's incredibly strong, heavy for his size, and agile. Honestly, some people are genetically predisposed to have muscles that are more dense than the general population. I'll try and link a study that I was reading on PubMed about this. The study shows that muscle density is more important than muscle size when it comes to strength, but you have people out there that are both. I've met them. It's insane. And his giant build is also a strategic advantage. No one expects the linebacker to move like a gymnast. Unless his adversaries have met him, they would have no idea that the dude that looks like a bear is their target. And so when they're looking for the slinky assassin in the shadows, he's going to come at them and hit them like a truck. I also think that Kalam is part of a group of people that are so physically gifted, they aren't on the same bell curve as the rest of us when it comes to physical prowess. If you ever want to feel inferior, just go watch some of the NFL Combine and you'll see what I mean. You have people running like 4-second 40-yard dashes and stuff. It's incredible. They'll bench over 200 pounds 40 times. Just wild stuff. Let's look at a few examples of some genetically gifted athletes. All these people are genetic freaks in the best way possible. Look at DK Metcalf. This guy is at the pinnacle of physical condition. A few years ago, he ran a race against some of the best track athletes in the United States. He didn't win, but he held his own while weighing about 50 pounds more than everyone else in the competition. I mean, this guy is huge and he's running at like Olympic athlete speeds. It's just incredible. I listened to a podcast called Effectively Wild. It's a baseball podcast, and someone sent a question in that was like, if aliens showed up and said, we have an athletic competition on our planet and you have to send someone and they have to do well or we're going to destroy Earth, but you can only pick one person, one of the hosts picked DK Metcalf because you don't know anything about the sport. They're not going to explain it to you. You just have to pick someone that's athletically gifted. And she thought, he's our best hope. Speaking of baseball, early in his MLB career, a video of Mike Trout was uploaded to the internet and it was him box jumping. He's like 6'2" and 235 pounds. He was jumping onto a box that was over 5 feet tall. That is a level of athleticism almost no one else can attain. And I mean, I think that Mike Trout and Kalam have a lot in common when it comes to their physical build. Now, I know some of you may be thinking, well, they have personal trainers, they have modern nutrition and medicine. Like, that isn't possible in like a grimdark fantasy world. Go back and look at boxers from 100 years ago. They were built to destroy. And it's not like they had modern nutrition. A lot of them were like drinking, and like some of them grew up so poor that they were malnourished until they were adults and could fight their way to eating regularly. Look at this photo of James J. Jeffries and Jack Johnson. They were both over 6 feet tall and jacked. And this was in the 1910s. They would snap any of us like a twig. Same goes for anyone in the Malazan world. The physical advantage cannot be underestimated. Kalam is built like a brick shithouse. He floats like a butterfly and hits like a bull. He's probably in the top 0.1% of people when it comes to physical abilities. This is a huge advantage and acts as a force multiplier when added to proper mindset and training. To sum this up, Kalam is just one of a kind and very much built different. His mental toughness, brought on by his upbringing, helped him survive what I assume was a grueling and haunting training process that took his exceptional raw tools and honed them into a weapon rarely seen in the Malazan world. I hope you enjoyed this video. This might be a little rough. It's my first Malazan speculation video. I'm probably going to make more of them because it's just way too fun to think about the series. You should check out some of the books I mentioned, especially Range. I learned a ton from that book. But thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.